Inception.
It's OBS.
Incredible.
Nice.
Incredible. We had some more friendly neighbors stop by and say hello.
I am you. Can I come by to grab some dates and also mushrooms?
We're talking about food here, about food.
Yeah, they all have food.
Definitely.
Thank you.
Woohoo! Yeah, for all of you that's joining remotely, feel free to just chime into the conversation anytime you want. I think we're planning for this to be more like a workshop and discussion kind of thing. We have a bunch of materials we prepared. We would love for people to just like jump in whenever they have ideas and make it more like a free-flowing sort of thing. Let me check if I'm recording. Okay, yeah. Recording? Okay.
Oh, that's pretty groovy.
And just making sure Malika is online.
I think so. I mean, I don't know. It's like super late. It's like 12 o'clock for her, so it might be really late. Hi, welcome. I was thinking, should we do some sort of video recording too?
Oh yeah.
Like impromptu video recording? Yeah, that would be nice to get the setting going. And I will
Can
post.
we set it up on a tripod somewhere?
I would just low tech it, put it somewhere here. I recently had this charged. Did it not charge it right?
Oh no.
I think I didn't. Wait, I charged it for 2 days. Maybe it didn't plug in. It's
Oh my
dead.
god.
Never mind. Plan B. Plan B. Abort.
I can use my phone.
Could you use your phone?
Yeah.
That'd be amazing. Do we need?
Do you want to use
Do you want to
my
put
bag
it
as, like,
around here? Like
But wait, how long are we gonna record? Oh, it's gonna be an hour, right?
probably we don't have to record the entire hour,
Okay.
but or just like get the view of the room and everything. Or actually, I can use my computer. Lucy, actually, I think I can use my computer. I can use a display capture. Yeah, I can use a video capture device.
But it will just video you.
No, we can turn it.
Oh.
Okay. And then put it right here. Yeah, Lucy, so we're good. We're gonna use this. Okay. So I'm gonna just turn this way, and if you guys wanna be in the video, you can squeeze over. If you don't, no pressure. Okay, I think we can kind of get started. Thank you everyone for coming. Really appreciate you being here. So this is the first session for our course called Solarpunk Societies. And today's topic is leaving the matrix. So before we dive deep into the session, I just want to make this into like an icebreaker kind of discussion. What does the matrix mean to you? Like when you hear the word the matrix, we're not really talking about the movie, but like when we talk about like, oh, like we live in the matrix, what does that really mean to you? Would anyone like to get started?
I can go first.
Go, Captain.
Let's see here. I was going to turn on my video. Plus, anybody see that?
I think we can, yes. Hi.
Calvin, you're good to take Archer to Mars if you want. I'll be joining you out.
Your screen's a bit foggy.
Oh, yeah. Okay, maybe I'll just not worry about it.
That works?
What about this? Is that better?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really nice. Goosefoot.
You can't see my face, but you can see what I'm doing.
Yes.
So for me, the Matrix can be envisioned as like many different things, but what I hear is an artificial construct within your mind. And it can be a physical manifestation, but really it's the thoughts, beliefs, ideals that you hold and, kind of allow to generate your reality or your life or live by. And when you're able to kind of release that and just kind of be, is when, for me at least, because I can still do all the same thing I did when I was, quote, in the Matrix, but also, like, it's totally different.
Right. So
I
if you
do
want to
it for
summarize,
my own reason, for my own purpose, for my own, well, not necessarily my own, but, because I want to.
so if you could summarize that in one sentence, I think you mentioned something like a set of beliefs, like a set of fixed beliefs, something like that.
It would be an artificial construct, and usually that speaks to me would be in your mind.
So an artificial construct of like a set of beliefs. That's
wow. It doesn't even have to be artificial, right? If you believe it and you're living by it, that's real.
Right.
But it's been, kind of right. So right now I believe this is the greatest good, so I'm picking front yard salad.
I could be part of the Matrix, or it could not be.
Yeah, I don't feel like this is. I mean, I guess I'm part of the economical matrix, if you will. Like, I'm aligning with the natural matrix here.
Nice. I love the idea of multiple matrices. Okay, I would like to toss this to someone else, maybe, if anyone would like to share, like, with the prompt, what does the matrix really mean to you when you hear the word matrix? Yes?
I think some kind of world where you don't think so much and you are like in some kind of wheel, and you cannot escape because it's too fast.
Oh, that's beautiful. I love that. So in some sort of wheeling situation where you're stuck in this wheel but you cannot escape because the wheel is too fast, that you're just constantly in it and then you don't really have the space to think. I love that. That's beautiful. Yes?
Yeah, it's like a river, and you're kind of floating along with everyone else in it. And maybe that's the matrix, and stepping out of the matrix is kind of sitting on the bank of the river and being able to watch things pass by, and kind of being able to give yourself space and time. Or that's what it personally.
Nice. Yeah, I definitely see similarities. So it's like when you're in it, you can't really see it or feel it. It's happening all the time. You just kind of don't have the choice but to opt in. But once you step out, you can see like the grid or whatever, the river, the hamster wheel, or whatever it is. So would anyone else like to share before we move on?
It reminds me of something that I heard about, like, how you can keep someone in a prison is by making sure they don't know they're in a prison, so that they can escape, which was for me like, oh yeah, that's actually what they're trying to do, right?
Yeah.
With the conditioning and everything.
Yeah, totally. That's amazing. We're gonna write this down at some point. I love all the input. So just to repeat, the fact that we don't realize we're in the matrix means that we could most likely be in the matrix in a way, because we are conditioned to not realize of this design that causes us to think and feel and act in certain ways, right? So we try to do a little summary of what the matrix could be, and we just like define it as a set of institutions and beliefs to make people dependent to authority and engage in transactional consumer-based relationships. So I think a lot of people said over here, I think there's a bunch of overlap into like a conditioned belief in some way, but because like I guess when we talk about the matrix in a more societal economic way, but less of a philosophical like material or like spiritual materialistic way, but put it into our society, current society, and at a larger context, one of the most like talked about and the most like obvious effect of the matrix is what you call like the modern day capitalist system, right? Like everything is transactional based. You can't really get out of it. Like we are hyper dependent in the system, as we observed with what happened with COVID. Like we realized that like if there's any tiny change in the whole global supply chain, like a lot of our, like the ripple effect is just so huge that people don't have enough supplies in certain ways. We bundle up on toilet paper and then we all freak out and panic. Okay. So that could be like a kind of effect to it. So I want to share some really interesting statistics that we've been finding over the year. So in 1983, 90% of US media was owned by 50 companies. And by the year 2012, which is actually 10 years before, and now 90% of US media is controlled by only 6 media giants. And then this ratio doesn't seem to stop. And as we can see, let me maybe show these. So this is another really shocking fact I found, that these companies, if you put their market caps, compare them to countries' entire GDP, you realize companies like Amazon, their market cap is bigger even than Korea and Australia, which is kind of shocking if you think about it. These companies are richer than, like, you know, some of the biggest economic entities in the whole world. And so is Apple and Microsoft. And I think, like, as we mentioned, you know, like the fact that we feel sometimes that like there's this kind of global economic matrix or socio-economical matrix going on. And when we look deeper into it and to think about like, why do we feel this way? Why is it like this? And then we can really start to see the rate of economic divide between sides of corporations. It's only increasing, and it's increasing at an exponential speed. It's not really like, let's say 50 years ago or 80 years ago, there's probably like a plethora of different companies where like capitalism just started to flourish. And now we're at a stage where like there are a few companies that's just too big to fail, and then too big to stop growing. So, and it's getting harder and harder for other entities to kind of like squeeze a share into the space. And all these, and the economic system that these companies play a role in is also tied to the social media system that we encounter on a day-to-day basis, right? The stuff that we consume on social media, the stuff we consume on traditional media, all of these, we think that, oh, they're coming out from like all these random sources. But then like if you compare the sources of media production, whether it's music, whether it's movie, we can see that they have been kind of gulped up. Like all the indie productions have been slowly gulped up by these greater conglomerates throughout the years. And so a few really interesting reads that we've collected throughout the years that we would like to share with people here. One of them is called Propaganda. Is anyone familiar with the work of Edward Bernays? Yes? No? So, okay. So Edward Bernays, we can call him the evil genius. He is a sibling of Sigmund Freud, and he wrote this book Propaganda back, I think, during the Industrial Revolution, where he's probably the first to corner this term, propaganda. And he kind of talked about this idea in the sense of strategic promotion on all sorts of media and brands. So I'm gonna just read the first page. It says, only through the active energy of the intelligent few can the public at large become aware of and act upon new ideas. So how do we feel when we hear that?
Can you read it again?
Okay. Only through the active energy of the intelligent few can the public at large become aware of and act upon new ideas. Like, do we agree? Do we think it's bullshit? What do you think of this statement?
What is the intelligent field?
Intelligent few. So like there's a few people that in this world that's hella smart, and then they should be the one that's creating the narrative, and the public consume this narrative. So it's like, this is kind of...
No. We're failing.
What's that, Sar?
Said no, that's already happening and we're failing.
Yeah, exactly.
So like, I don't know this, but like the first like thousands years of our lives when we had the kings and queens and hierarchies, like as the common law of the land, people were being ruled by a class of people that are divergent to the majority of the population of human beings. And only recently have the main population of human beings started to become the majority of their own majority and taking control of your own lives. And in that, like, everybody started doing the same shit. They started trying to make hierarchies again. Like, it didn't make any sense. Like, right now, we're having businesses that are corporations that are just pyramid schemes, literally a hierarchy going up into a point. And it's like, what's happening? We're just reliving our bad history, but technically, majority of the population is choosing to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, and then we can argue that the majority of population is choosing to do it because their thought framework is influenced by, I don't know, the previous generation or by people with, on the higher hierarchy of power control. So like the kind of, it's something that seems to be keeping this hamster wheel going in a way. And yeah, but this book Propaganda was written like, I don't know, about 50 years ago or something. It's been around for quite a while. Psychology students, it's kind of like one of the mandatory studies for psychology students, for people that's getting into marketing and sort of things, which is something I find quite interesting because when you read through it, it feels really sadistic, that's the word. Like it feels wrong, saying like, oh, like we're really trying to actively make these things to control how you think and really like using all the stats to make sure that you will comply with the agenda that we're trying to push. So one of the examples that they talked about in this book was this guy was trying to help some cigarette companies sell cigarettes. And they were thinking about how do they really expand the market of cigarettes to more people. And it was at the time where like the leftist movement was catching more momentum, where so they decided to combine the idea of smoking cigarettes with female liberation. And then they did all these campaigns of like sexy females smoking cigarettes, and then to really try to create this idea like, oh, smoking cigarettes is liberating and it's really cool and it's like empowering female. Even though like I don't think that's incorrect, like females should be able to do whatever they feel like, but that's definitely not the intention of why they're creating this campaign, right? Like in the end, what they want is just to sell more cigarettes. So similar logic, things haven't changed much. And one of the interesting phenomena we can see, it's like from this like meme, kind of the starter pack meme, I don't know if you're familiar, where it's like, oh, if you want to believe in, if you want to belong to like a certain subculture, you consume these things to prove that you have the identity in this subculture. So we can see that with like skater culture, with like, I don't know, like any other subgenre kind of culture, like the hiking culture and also like the surfer culture or whatever. So it's kind of, it's kind of like the same concept, just as a continuation, like Tara was talking about. And aside from that, there's also these, I guess, schools of authors that have written something really interesting about just like a continuation of media propaganda as per se. There's this really phenomenal read called Amusing Ourselves to Death. And the book is basically, as the title, that we as a species, we are kind of amusing ourselves to death at this point. And they talk about how our attention span has decreased through, I don't know, for about like a few 100%, where back in the first presidential debate in the US, where audience were able to like sit in a scenario focusing on like a 5-hour presidential debate and being able to follow through with very long, eloquent, logical thoughts. But to right now, like we even get distracted watching 20 seconds of TikTok, and it's just one of the few things that the media has kind of caused to our minds. And we've shown this statistic before. And another really interesting reference, thanks to Lucy for pointing it out, is this concept of bullshit jobs, which is also very self-explanatory. So this guy, David Graeber, defined that over half of societal work is pointless and becomes psychologically destructive when paired with a work ethic that associates work with self-worth. And a bullshit job is meaningless or unnecessary wage labor, which the worker is obliged to pretend to have a purpose. And the statistics show that in the UK and Netherlands, around 40% of workers consider their job to fit this description. So I'm curious if we can get a show of hands who among this crew who's had a bullshit job before. Only half? Oh, no, okay, well, a lot more than
this is
half.
like a selective bias.
Yeah, this is not your standard crew. I think if we did this in, I don't know, Silicon Valley, it would have been a lot more different.
I read about half the book, and the author mentions that if you believe your job to be a bullshit job, then it most likely is.
I mean, I think that's pretty accurate.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's pretty accurate. But like, why did we get to this place, right? If we really sit down for a moment and think, why do you guys think that like people need to do bullshit jobs for whatever reason? What? Yeah, need to get paid and then need to sustain themselves, right, on all of our basic needs. But what else aside from getting paid?
Are you asking like on our end or on like why do these jobs exist?
Yeah, or like why do you think people would be okay or like would comply with bullshit job that like people put up with it and do it aside from the fact that they can get paid from it?
I don't think there's any other reason.
I mean, I think it's maybe the same thing that this thing from the prison that they don't really know otherwise. So that they maybe also are not really noticing that it's a bullshit job, so also that's why they're staying.
Right. It's like maybe it's like if you've never really, let's say, if you never really tried candy and you try it for the first time and it's really bitter and it's spoiled and it's fucked up, but you're like, oh, maybe this is what candy tastes like. And then you're just gonna keep eating it and assume that that's what candy is. So it could be kind of similar logic where you did not know there could be an alternative and everyone around you is doing this, you're expected to do this, you're just like, oh, this is how life is.
There's also I was just gonna say, this last bit, which is like associating work with self-worth, also makes me think about how the meritocracy is so inherently tied to capitalism. You know, where like the reward function of what we care about in society is specifically, and I'm thinking about like so much of my school went to consulting and IB jobs where you just sit and do nothing. Like you literally don't get assigned work until 4 p.m. And then it's just typing in Excel sheets, but it is the most prestigious job, the most high paying because it is like a function of like you have high net worth by doing it. You know? Which is sad because I think the meritocracy has a ton of like benefits if we understand what merit means, or like if we assign new meaning to merit.
Yeah, I like that, assigning new meaning to merit.
I think there's also like a sunk cost fallacy that goes into our education. And so I think people maybe get locked into a field of work that they come to believe is mostly bullshit, or at least the jobs available within the field that you're qualified for or that you'll get hired for. I mean, it's like, well, I have this degree, so I have to do this kind of work.
Yeah, exactly.
I tend to find most of the work in this field that I'm qualified for to be bullshit work. But the alternative would be doing something outside of my degree field, or taking another bullshit job that's going to pay even less because you don't realize there are alternatives that could be more fulfilling.
Yeah, so it's like the sunk cost kind of thing where like I already committed so much. And yes, please.
Yeah, I was gonna say too, going along with that, I think that, you know, as labor as a whole has become like a lot more abstracted away from like physical labor especially. It's hard to imagine like bullshit jobs like occurring like 2,000 years ago.
Yeah.
Like, you know, bullshit manual labor jobs, like it's hard to picture.
Right, because you're actually, it's all needed.
Right.
Like building the fort and everything.
And so I feel like as so much of like everything is in the digital realm, it's a lot easier to picture bullshit jobs happening because the sort of labor facilitates that.
Something else that I've read, and let me try not to butcher this, is that like the reason that we have all these bullshit jobs is because capitalism depends on consumerism, and if we're all so tied in these jobs that don't matter,
we have to consume more. We're like, we're using Ubers because we don't have time to walk to work. We're like ordering in food because we don't have time to cook for ourselves, or ways that like we enjoy leisure, all based on points of consumption rather than like points of creativity.
Mm. And then I think that could be tied into the idea of infinite economic growth, where like, you know, there's like the stock market or the current crypto market is generating so many, just literally printing money and fake value. And all of this fake money has to be spent on somewhere. So that creates this vacancy of people need to be employed and prove that they're doing something, but really though they're not doing anything. So that's you know, could be another reason for the idea of bullshit jobs. And okay, what's next? And another interesting effect, I think this could be tied with the bullshit job, where I was thinking, like, another reason that people get kind of stuck here a lot of times is like our social network is very, like we are social creature by nature, and we usually navigate towards wherever our like most intimate social network navigates towards. So let's say if you are with a group of people, like your family, your friends, people that you grew up with, your local community, and everyone like believes in one thing, and then like everyone's Christian, right? But like you, for whatever reason, just really want to be a hardcore Muslim, and that's gonna be just almost impossible for you to do it in that environment. And that goes the same for the idea of like being stuck in this matrix, where if everything you're familiar with, everyone you know is in the system, it just takes a lot of you to be just completely out, where you feel like you might feel extremely lost and alone, and you feel like, oh wow, like am I the wrong one if everyone else is not feeling the same way? And there's this really interesting example that I spent an hour looking for the reference. I could not find it. I think I heard it mentioned somewhere where during colonial times, the Europeans arrived in Africa, and then they like tried to colonize and make Africans grow cotton. And then the Africans didn't want to grow cotton. They just want to hang out every day. So the Europeans were like, oh man, how are we going to make them work? And then they made this fabulous rule where they have announced that you cannot socialize unless you're at work. And then that increased the productivity of cotton to like a gajillion times. So the fact that they didn't allow people to like have parties and gatherings unless they're working changed how productive people are. And then this kind of logic still exists today, where if you do some research about like community building at different companies, like all different like big companies would pay like millions of dollars to hire experts to design the office space to make it feel like very communal. And then big companies will spend a lot of money into like people that are expert community builders, so that people would get kind of like sticky within this corporate situation where they don't want to leave because all of their friends are in this company, all of their people they like, and there's all these events, and then being at work, you don't feel alone, you feel you're together. But basically I think wanting to feel a sense of belonging is part of human nature. But once corporation formalize this kind of like instinct of ours, it makes it harder for us to opt out of this whole like elaborate system. And so here's a discussion time. This is a proud homemade Agartha meme. How can you really outrun the matrix? Like we kind of discussed, we're talking about matrix in a more socio-economic but also like thinking framework. Like we sort of vaguely define it, this is what's happening, but how really would you do it though? And I think this crew is probably more equipped to answer it than a lot of other crews. If you feel like you have made efforts towards owning sovereignty or towards recognizing the matrix, towards trying to live out of it, or maybe you already completely are living out of it, how did you do it? Right? Like what was challenging? What was easy? So anyone?
I feel like it happens in little chunks. One example is dumpster diving. It's a great example of like, saying fuck you matrix, the food is still fine. I don't have to like pay the prices that are assigned to this food in the store if I'm able to find it, and I think that like a really fun manifestation of the matrix that you could kind of distill in a certain way could be thought of as like a scarcity mindset, which is this belief that we should always be acting like there isn't enough to go around, no matter almost what it is we're talking about. I feel, and please, don't make me feel otherwise, but I feel like for most material necessities in our lives, there is more or less enough. The issue, I feel, is more distribution, and that gets perpetuated through this notion that there's not enough around. So people hoard wealth, or food, or housing, or water. Water's literally being traded on the international markets right now. How fucked up is that?
Yeah, we buy water from Fiji. Like, what the hell? What's going on? Why? Have you seen the springs around here? Like, yeah, totally. So dumpster dive, which I think that's like ties into how Mars is such a special community, because we're getting people that have never known dumpster dive was possible to try to go dumpster dive for the first time, and we just see the amount of waste that's created every single day, and we're like, what the hell? Why are these perfectly good food being tossed away? And that's just one aspect of so many other things that could fit into this category. Yes?
I think a necessary amount of skepticism is important, especially in regards to what we're calling the matrix. That being all the things on the left-hand side of the screen. Whatever your job is, or whatever political factions are existent, or anything. I think it's important to kind of approach it from a veil of, we've only been around for as long as we've been alive. Which is just a fraction of how long all of these different facets of society have been around. So I think that kind of having a mindset of humility in a way, where you're willing to learn about these aspects of society, and gain more knowledge about how they work and how you exist in it and have existed in it for most of your life, is one of the only ways I can think of being able to move outside of it. Without a knowledge of how you're a consumer, or how you're a participant in a lot of these different ways. It's, you wouldn't be able to know if you're winning in the race if you didn't know all the players in it.
I love that it's a softer and more permissive mindset. Because my answer to this question is I don't know that I will ever escape the matrix, and I don't know if that is as important to me as maintaining my hive. And part of that is being aware of all the ways that I do contribute specifically to leaning into the matrix. For example, every Instagram ad I get hits right. I want to buy all of that. But unfortunately, and that sucks that I buy into the consumerist mindset, and it's something that I think about a lot of well, what are the benefits, or what is the fulfillment that I'm getting from consumerism that I can start sourcing elsewhere? But there's also the understanding that a lot of my social circle lives within this hierarchical status of, wealth through material. And I will never fully break free of that if I want to maintain these relationships. And so what is the middle ground between feeling like I'm doing enough to feeling like there's a better balance, because I will never be doing enough.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Maybe we can leave this for a later discussion. Do we really have to leave the matrix? Can we change the matrix? Can we just stay exactly where we are and be okay with it? Or should we, right?
Maybe a better metaphor is to let the matrix just wash over you. Because the matrix is all around us.
Yeah.
You kind of describe it in some terms. If the matrix means advertisements, you're not going to escape advertisements unless you freaking move to the woods, right? But you can absorb the stimuli, and you can not attach to it,
Right.
And this takes a lot of forms, political divisiveness. It's our choice, the extent to which we buy into this narrative that, if you're not on my side of the fucking line, you're a bad person, and I don't have any time for you, or any respect, or any empathy.
Yeah, totally.
Manufactured desire, right? It comes back to ads, but it's they're always going to be trying to do it.
Do we need to eliminate everything?
Yeah. So maybe just point as perhaps that's a better way to think about it, as just letting it wash over you.
But,
Does that make sense?
yeah, but going back to what Mason was saying, it's like having that critical mindset to kind of recognize that it's sort of, it could be something that we could work on personally instead of like demolish everything and leave. But would you like to add?
Yeah, and kind of following up on what you were saying about, you know, not being able to completely outrun it and, you know, still existing in it. I think that we have the option of completely leaving it, you know, and that's the idea of living completely off the grid and not interacting with anybody, because I think that's the only way you could really truly outrun it. But then it gets the question, is that outrunning it or is that just ignoring it?
Yeah.
Because it's still there, you know, and nothing really changed.
Like Amish people.
And so I feel like, you know, then the answer is, you know, if you don't want to do that, me personally, I don't want to live a life not like completely isolated from other people. So then I think the question is that, you know, as long as the matrix exists and as long as we're trying to do something differently, we kind of exist in like an inherent contradiction where, you know, our life as society as we know it and kind of like the social structures as we know it are very different from our beliefs as to how things should run. And so I think it's like a day-to-day existence of living in contradiction. I think the only way to exist in that and to do well in that without going insane is to like be with other people who kind of see it as you do and to have a community in that you can like, talk about it. So I think that's really the only way is to be able to like share that like contradiction that you live in with other people.
Yeah, amazing. I love that you brought into the idea of having a community with shared belief, because we have prepared slides for that later. But yeah, amazing. Thank you all for sharing really inspiring stuff. And so I want to kind of talk about a bit on just some of the examples of people that try to exit the matrix throughout history. So I'm assuming this, I could totally be wrong, as the socioeconomic matrix that we're assuming is what we just described. It's like capitalism and everything. Then I felt like maybe the beginning of this could be like the rising of industrialization, when we started really to heavily industrialize all the cities, and when technology improvement has becoming like more and more severely different between cities and villages. I think that's where we can start to feel like the grid, aka the matrix grid, as like first appearing. And this is like a phenomenon that I found to be super interesting. It's called transcendentalism, and it's the social movement that's happening in the U.S. during the first U.S. Industrial Revolution. It was led by philosophers and social scientists called Thoreau and Emerson. They're these two dudes that both died too young, so I think their ideology didn't pass through. But there's still like this kind of group in Boston, Eastern New York, around that time. But basically, what they advocate, what they've written a lot of essays, kind of criticizing on the lifestyle that was going on in the cities, where they like criticized just heavy exploitation of labor, where there's all these like big, rich, fat American landowners and started to like, you know, build all these factories, and then all the tiny ant workers have like, you know, work 12-hour shifts every day and then end up having no food. And then they started describing this lifestyle and then started to say like, we don't need to live like this, we can choose another way. And the way they kind of advocate is to like move away from this, live by yourself, or like find a community. And then, you know, Thoreau wrote this really famous essay called Walden, and it's just a really beautiful book about he living in a wood by himself, observing ants, talking with trees, and just like as a very like tranquil essay. But he died very young, so I think like that didn't add to much of the argument of like matrix exit. But I do think that that's something we can think of, like, okay, like you try to kind of opt out of this scenario, you made it work for you, but again, you're also opting out the dependency you could gain from a society, right? Like medical, like things like, you know, like improvement on health and technology sort of things. So, and another movement that we can think of is probably like what you would call the modern day hippie movement, which really started also like around the same time when industrialization started. So there's this really interesting book called All Things New, American Utopia Movement since the 1800s. and it kind of captured on like where did the modern, like we're familiar with the hippie movement. For lack of a better word, we can say it's like Woodstock in the 60s. A lot of people decided, you saw like the upcoming like giant upgrade in technology that's happening, and there's a lot of wars going on, so there's all these peace-loving people decided to opt out of what you would call the matrix, start building their own communes, growing their own food. And really what this book was talking about is that this kind of phenomenon wasn't new in the 60s. In the 60s, it was just like the communitarian movement happened to merge with the psychedelics movement and became like a music and art and culture scene. But the communitarian movement had been around for almost 100 years before that, right? Like eco-villages and communes have been around way before cities have been a thing. And when industrializations happened, when people started migrating to cities and all the media attention have been focusing on like, what's the latest invention from Thomas Edison, what's the next iteration of the railroads? People kind of forgot about, or it wasn't as mentioned or documented in history that there is an equal amount of energy of people moving away from the cities. There were famous communities such as the Shakers or the Quakers, where they formed these like large-scale farms outside of the city, and then they just like try to be self-sustainable, without participating too much with having an industrialized job as much as they can. So I feel like whenever there is a mainstream, there is a fringe. So when the mainstream was industrialization, now it's whatever we call it, like this neo matrix system, there's always been a fringe, and the fringe has always been existing. And but a part of the problem, I guess, about the hippie and the commune movement, part of the problem that caused these communities to not be able to scale and not be able to be long lasting, a lot of it is the fact that they have removed themselves away from technology. They remove themselves away from the capitalist system, which makes their lives a lot harder, right? You can't really, like order things from Amazon. Like if you don't make money, if you have to completely own your whole set of means of production, be self-sustainable, first of all, that's really challenging. And second of all, because a lot of these communities decided to move away because they, on the pretense, like on the assumption that they disagree with mainstream ideology of like capitalism and like technology in a way. So in a way, it made these communities kind of anti-tech, where they're like, oh, technologies are evil. Like let's not use cell phones because they suck your souls. But that also excluded them from a lot of readily available information that you could find online, sort of thing. So there's a few reasons on these. And another, I guess, examples of what could be potentially done that's different, it's the idea of a co-op in comparison of a capitalist like traditional company. So these are just some fun facts from like one of the websites that define what really is a co-op. So are we familiar with the concept of cooperativism? Would anyone like to define it?
Essentially means co-ownership.
Yeah, co-ownership.
How it gets governed is very often variable. Sometimes it would be kind of like a board of folks who are sort of elected to serve as representative, especially of a large collective. But the example here seems to us more like direct democracy models, which I think is better when tenable, and what makes something tenable for direct democracy or not is often limited to buy-in. How much do people care about, continuing to stay up with the collective? And I think there's examples like grocery stores where a very small percentage of the co-owners actually like vote or stay involved with most things. And I think there's examples of like, small communes where people are very invested.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yes. And so co-op is also like it's a legal structure as well, in opposed to traditional LLCs, where in the legal agreement it will say something like, oh, like everyone that put in an X amount of work, basically every employee owns part of the company, so that people have ability to, I guess, like play with their shares. If sell their shares if they decide to exit, people can also use their shares to vote on company issues. So in a way, it's more egalitarian, it's more democratic, but it also makes it a bit less competitive compared to traditional company. So one of the few things I saw was that in regular co-op, the difference in wage gap is usually limited. So the person that makes the least amount of money and the person that makes the most amount of money in a co-op, it's like 5 to 10 times at max. But in a traditional company, there is no limit. So like the CEO could be making 300 times than like the volunteer. And then because of the incentive, the capitalistic incentive, that traditional companies are usually able to move a lot more aggressively and to be able to be more competitive and take up more market share compared to co-ops. But now I think we're actually seeing kind of a renaissance of co-ops with the whole DAO scene, which is something that we will spend some time talking about in the next few sessions, where basically DAO is a digital co-op backed by blockchain, where company shares are represented with virtual tokens that anyone could create. Like you just be able to create these virtual tokens that represent value and then use this as a way to delegate people to vote. So it's kind of a way for people to form these new ways of cooperating together, new ways of defining cooperative rules. And I think because it's an invention of the crypto industry, it has a bit of the crypto industry influence in it. But what we're actually witnessing right now, it's like the idea of old school cooperativism moving into the crypto industry through the lens of DAOs. And Alina here is working with DAOs very heavily. She's probably one of the most Daoist people I know.
The DAO expert.
The DAO what?
A DAO expert. A DAO expert.
Oh, the DAO expert. If you have any question about DAOs, she will be the one to pick the brains of. But we're also gonna do like a more longer session about what DAOs is, how they work, what's the potential, yada yada yada.
And Blair will also be joining that, and he is an expert in DAOs as well.
Yeah, so we have a bunch of DAO people. Yes, that's a great. So here's like some, I guess, like basic assumptions of how potentially we could exit the matrix with style. So going back to what we were talking about on why we're hyper dependent, I think a lot of people mentioned, number one thing, it's like you're physiologically dependent to the matrix because you need to make money, you need to make an income. And what is the income for? It's used to support our means of living. What is our means of living? So that can go back to this famous Maslow hierarchy of needs. Are we familiar with Maslow? Yes? No? Everyone? Okay. So basically the hierarchy of needs is a pyramid of like different degrees of needs. First layer is physiological, so things like shelter, food, water. These are like basic things that we need to live as human, and it's common. It's like we all need water. There's no type of human that needs like different kinds of water. It's like very commonly shared. And then after that, it's safety. After that, it's like love and belonging, and that comes with having community, having people you like, and having people that you can feel like you're taken care of. And then after that, it's social esteem. And then at the top, it's self-actualization. So the assumption here is that if we don't have physiological need like fulfilled, we're not going to be able to have the space to go through self-actualization. And then most of us, going back to bullshit job and going back to, living in the matrix, like we will notice that like if you do have a quote unquote bullshit job, like the majority amount of your time and energy is just spent so that you can basically sustain your physiological need, but that extrapolated our freedom to actually pursue all these other needs if all our energy and time is spent on physiological. So let's say if we were to be able to exit that, right, then the first step, like logically, is like how do we really own our physiological need, right? Like what's the process? What does that process look like? And do we have to build everything from scratch? Is there other ways that we can, like bootstrap and integrate? And and so that was some food for thought for the next session. But before we end, we have to make an important disclaimer. So first of all, exiting the matrix doesn't always necessarily mean that we have to become an enemy of the state, right? So I've been doing some research on like what does it mean to exit the matrix online, and if you do some Google research, you find a lot of these statements and videos and articles. It could get to be really extreme, where people are like, oh, like let's just burn everything to the ground, like you know, these things are all wrong, the systems are all wrong. But you know, it's really easy for this matrix exit talk to connect with extreme libertarianism or anarchism. Not saying that these are not good, but like it doesn't not always have to be this way. Like it doesn't need to be that extreme, right? It could be like a few folks were talking about, it could be a software integration. It could have step-by-steps. And it could also be maybe you don't even need to change that much, but to just have a refreshed mindset of critical thinking, of starting to evaluate things differently. And it could be a lot more fluid than what like the general impression is. And the extremes of each lead to emphasis on the, okay, I'm not gonna read this, but I'm just gonna leave this for a while. But thinking critically about every narrative that they're given and being bold enough to question authorities doesn't imply becoming an enemy of the state in order to make an impact. And this is one of my favorite quotes written by Blair, who's gonna help us co-host the course. Revolutions without solutions most likely create new problems after solving the last, as we've seen multiple times in history. And another really important thing is that anti-capitalism or anti-matrix, you would say, doesn't mean anti-productivity. And this is something that happens a lot in like eco-communes and people that kind of like try to build communities from scratch outside of the matrix, where people kind of like make assumptions that, oh, like productivity and industrialization is bad. That's why if we don't want to do that, we should just like not work. But is not working also like if we don't work, then like we don't really have a way to also like develop the things that cover our basic needs that can actually grant us our sovereignty. So purpose-driven productivity is better than bullshit jobs, but it doesn't mean that once we don't have bullshit jobs, we stop being productive. Like productivity is always there, right? Like there's nothing wrong if you're working towards something you really, really believe in, or if you're working towards something that actually fulfills you. But yeah, but I think like there's a common like phenomena where people are like, oh, once we exit the matrix, we're just like sing kumbaya all the time. Let's just like lie down in the grass every day. But it's all ideal and so, but that's also not sustainable, right? And the last one is that self-reliance doesn't necessarily equal to radical individualism. So exiting the matrix by owning means of production are usually communal tasks by nature. If anything, we should work with each other's closer than ever instead of being further apart. And being compassionate, communicate clearly, respecting differences, and recognizing importance of everyone's ethics, they're all part of this whole practice. If we're talking about, okay, we want to exit this thing, we want to create a better solution, then like what does that better solution look like? Does it mean that each of us get like our individual house and we don't engage with each other, we have our own food, we have our own water? Or does it mean like a way for us to really coordinate and share resources more evenly? But if that's the case, how are we gonna do it, you know? Maybe there's like, I'm sure there is the knowledge is out there, but it's like, how do we really incorporate that? And before even taking a step before, how do we really establish like a set of ethics while we're building these kind of alternative matrix scenarios? So the last quote that I want to end this with, it takes a gang to build a village, and it takes a village to build a new world. And I think that gives an end for today's session. So next week, we're gonna have a guest lecturer. Her name is Melike. She's a social scientist studying at the intersection of social science and DAOs. And she has prepared a really long and elaborate session talk called Taking the Green Pill. So it's kind of like taking a continuation of what we discussed today, but putting it into like a bigger socioeconomic framework, and how, like, what are some of the existing socioeconomic frameworks that allow people to coordinate in a more efficient way that could like enable more like enable individuals to gain sovereignty at a larger scale. So that's it for today. Thank you. Do we have any last thoughts, comments, questions? Yes?
Earlier on the Edward Bernays and the propaganda thing, have you seen A Century of Self before?
Well, that sounds familiar, but no, is it Chomsky?
It's a documentary. That's how I learned about Edward Bernays. It's like a 6-part, like, what is the English? Is BBC?
Wait, who's the author?
It's a documentary. Look up Century of Self, Adam Curtis.
Oh, Curtis. Yeah.
It's really good. For people who haven't heard of Bernays or any of that, it's like a very fast. It's all free on YouTube.
We should have a movie night.
We could.
It'd be cool. Yeah, it's fantastic and very eye-opening.
Oh, cool! I would love to watch it. Well, we should add this to our reference list. Yeah, it sounds good. Sounds good.
I guess I would just throw out there that I feel like the timing of industrialization coinciding with sort of this movement and transcendentalism is a very funny example and very to analyze, especially because it's much more well documented than more historical examples. But I'd also say that I was reminded of this David Graeber's most recent book, which I'm forgetting the exact name of, but it's basically sort of combining these perspectives of anthropology and history and archaeology rather, to really try and do the best to take a look at prehistory and the social dynamics there. And I haven't read the whole book. Full disclaimer, I read the back and a bit of Wikipedia and the intro and first chapter. And one of the first things it comes to is just to say that perhaps people didn't willingly move to cities originally. Perhaps actually it makes sense that people were quite content living the way that they had been, and that as sort of power centralized, they were able to more or less coerce people into living in cities in the first place, which this cited a number of different points of evidence for, but one of which is just this notion that, for example, agriculture, especially early on, was extremely arduous and not really a convenient way to get your food compared to how people had been getting it for a long time, which is largely hunting and gathering and some amount of pastoralism, you might call it, which is kind of roving. Basically, you have a pack of animals or whatever, and instead of staying in one place and trying to manage all these different fields and do a rotation, just moving around, and it kind of also reminded me of this notion in, you guys might have heard of this book, The Four Agreements. One of the really poignant things from that book that has always stuck with me is this notion that they're essentially domesticated humans. You know what I mean? Living far from our true heart and soul center. Where am I going with this? Well, I mean, I guess I'll just say that I feel like we have several minds within us. We have our head, we have our heart, we have our gut instinct, we have our soul, we have however many you want to think about, but our minds by far the most easily programmed and influenced, I think, by external sources, especially in manipulative ways. Our hearts, if they're open, they feel this or that, but may not be swayed about who we are, right? Whereas our heads are really easy to program, and there's a whole lot of science on exactly how to do that.
Yeah.
So I guess I just end the blurb by urging people to spend time getting out of your head. So you can cultivate that space in your heart.
Can we do a getting out of your head exercise? A group exercise on just heart vibing? Heart vibing workshop. Who's down? There's no conversation, just it's all about feeling. We're gonna do a dance party like that.
I feel that's what happens a lot at parties. Actually, which is put in this party construction that actually heals us because it's so hard, full of heart. I think that's also why we need to sometimes party and dance.
Yeah. Like yeah, totally. Not like intellectualize everything, but just more like feeling the intuition more and feeling the emotions more. Mm. Yeah, maybe we can do like an exotic dance session one of these days. Yeah,
I mean,
focusing
I feel
to
like that's a good way
exotic
to
dance.
play
Yes.
hard, you know? Yeah, and just of course, always meditation is a good way to like cultivate that practice of letting thoughts come to you.
Ecstatic dance, let's go.
The robots are into it. All right, so I'm gonna stop the screen recording.